So on to sport now. You don't often hear that being said on here. And here we have a chap called Ben Wollaston, who's number 40-something in World Snooker. And here he is on Wednesday, just taking a few shots against his opponent, who's Mark Selby. But some very interesting chit-chat amongst the commentators on BBC.
Yeah, very controlled. I seem to remember reading an interview, I think, where Ben was talking about
62.
After what he feels was the COVID jab, and then he immediately feeling
63.
Unusual, that his hand was shaking a lot, and haven't seen him play since then. But no sign of that now. That's good. Looks rock solid on the shot.
70.
Yes, his hands do look steady. You remember when we had 71. The jab, they'd say to you, can you please stick around for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and make sure you feel okay? And it was in that 5 or 10 minutes, he either fainted or collapsed. It was one of the two. Then he felt fine, and he went home, and he collapsed again. So in the immediate aftermath of his jab, he collapsed twice.
75.
And ever since then, it's been a very, very gradual
77.
Up and down return to full health. And I know there are certain weeks where, in the early days, he couldn't practice more than an hour a day because it would be so exhausting. And I think he's learnt to manage that. Still has periods, if he's feeling tired, where it comes back a little bit. But by and large, touch wood, he is healthy again. And that's the reason why he's made it back to the Crucible for the first time in 12 years. So it's been a bit of a journey.
So for several months, the 37-year-old struggled with the most basic tasks after he'd had his COVID jab, such as standing or even staying awake for any length of time. Despite all these health challenges, which still remain undiagnosed, I think we can all diagnose them right here and now. This is Ben Wollaston. He admirably managed to maintain his status on the tour, so he's back. But it was quite interesting to hear that on the commentary, a little bit of background about someone basically who just had a COVID jab, immediately keeled over, and it's taken him since 2021 to actually get back into the circuit. So that's 4 years, basically. I mean, I think they said longer than that, but that's because he'd been out, because he just wasn't good enough. But now he is, and he's back.
Well, obviously, I don't know the exact details of his life history. I do read stuff on...
Well, I'm not really asking you about the details of his life history.
We're talking about COVID jabs.
Yeah.
Well,
it's about vaccine injuries.
John Campbell, people follow him. He's been following all this up. The only point I would make about this, mRNA jabs were not used in China or Russia at all. Nobody had one.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think you're right that some of them were old-fashioned type vaccines where they just take the thing and then they denude it. But anyway, it's funny you mentioned Dr. John Campbell because I've got him as our final item this evening. Here he is talking to Dr. David Nutt. Now, do you know who Dr. David Nutt is?
Yeah, he used to be head of the British government's drugs policy, but they got rid of him because they didn't like what he had to say.
Was he being a bit sensible, by any chance?
Yes, I would say he was being sensible.
Well, let's have a listen. Let's see how sensible Dr. David Nutt. He's unforgettable, really, as the guy who's the chief drug advisor to the British government. And here he is talking to Dr. John Campbell a couple of days ago.
So I can remember as a child hippies, and there was a lot of talk about LSD and various psychedelics, but then it seemed to go really fairly quiet. I mean, I was born in 57, so I'm probably talking about the 60s. I had this peripheral awareness of this. And looking back, well, being reminded from your book, there was some pretty successful psychedelics being used in psychiatry in the late 40s, early 50s. Certainly a lot in the late 50s.
In the late 50s, yes. I mean, I think it was about 53 that Sandow made available LSD for research, particularly in psychiatry. And I think in 1957, the famed man Albert Hofmann, who discovered LSD, he made LSD. He then got access to magic mushrooms and then worked out that the active ingredient in magic mushrooms was called psilocybin. And Sandow made that available. It was called psilocybin. So there were basically two medicines. LSD was called Delicid and psilocybin was called psilocybin. And they made it available to researchers in most Western countries, in fact. And in those days, there weren't any psychiatric treatments. The drugs you mentioned earlier, chlorpromazine, wasn't really being rolled out to the late 50s, and imipramine and antidepressants later. So these drugs were the first true treatments in psychiatry, and psychiatrists thought they were really very, very powerful and effective. But then they moved out of medicine into what you alluded to, sort of became part of the hippie culture. And the hippie culture was anti the Vietnam War. And the American government was very pro the Vietnam War. And when hippies were putting up placards saying, drop acid, not bombs, that was seen as a terrifying threat to the US establishment. And they couldn't ban protests, but they could ban the drugs. So they banned the drug. They banned LSD. And then he thought, well, there's other drugs like LSD, psilocybin, DMT, we'll ban those. So even though there was no suggestion that these were about either harmful or even fueling protests. So the drugs got banned by the US in 1968. We followed suit, as we always do when the Americans say, jump, you say, how high, sir? And then in 71, the UN banned them, and they're still banned. They've been banned ever since. Yeah. It's impossible to work with them. And I think that's the worst censorship of research and clinical therapy in the history of the world. 55 years. Drugs which could transform people's lives for depression, PTSD, addictions, they've been banned simply because the American government thought they were actually fueling an anti-war protest.
Our generation, isn't it?
Yes.
You think of the mental distress I've had in times in my life. Could that have been attenuated, ameliorated? Mental distress I've seen in those around me.
Very likely, John. I think that's a very important point to make. That I'll make it in slightly different ways. But it wasn't just that these drugs were the first psychiatric medicines. They were also powerful and enduring. So, you didn't need many, 1 or 2 trips could give you a very, very long-lasting effect, maybe a lifetime. And then, of course, there's the other ways of using them. So Hoffman lived to 102, and he used what we would call a sort of mini or a microdose of LSD on a regular basis to keep his brain active and functioning. And the first British psychiatrist to use LSD was a man called Joel Elkes. He was professor in Birmingham in 1953. And he took LSD and he wrote about the experience and said, I think I know how it works. And he lived to 103. So it's quite possible that if we use these drugs sensibly like the early guys did, they could have given us resilience and longevity too, as well as help treating mental illness.
Well, this is all very interesting, isn't it? But we all know that the actual reality of the drugs industry as it's developed is essentially criminalised cartels.
Wasn't that the point in criminalising, in banning some of these substances, in prohibiting them, is that actually you can make a lot more money through supplying them in the black market?
Well, you can, and of course it's a way of controlling the population as well. So, the crack cocaine epidemics in the 1980s in major US cities were orchestrated by the CIA in order to fund the Contras. And, of course, LSD leaked out of being used in psychiatric treatments into, recreational use in California. And, of course, there's no rationality. But they're having a sensible adult discussion about the use of psychedelic drugs. The real problem we're facing is that drugs are ubiquitous.
I mean, aren't they being a bit flippant there, though? Because these drugs can completely destroy someone's brain.
Well,
we all know about
everyone.
Pretty much, most people know about acid casualties. Someone who's had their life wrecked by this LSD.
The thing is, making it illegal doesn't resolve any of the issues around it. People are going to do it anyway. They're going to do all sorts of things anyway, and making it illegal means you can't do it under controlled circumstances with the best
Isn't that
opportunity.
sort of a warning to the public? Look, if you do this, then either you're going to be committing a crime or you're going to be doing something stupid.
Well, look, I'm against prohibition. I'm against prohibition on humanistic grounds.
So what do you think LSD should be available like sweets, should it?
I didn't say that, Tony.
What do you mean then?
In Portugal, since the early 2000s, all possession of any kind of drug is a decriminalised offence. So that means that the police don't waste any time arresting people for possession for personal use of anything. What you need to do is educate people about what's safe and what's not safe. And of course, electricity's dangerous, yeah? Very dangerous. Maybe it should be banned because people get electrocuted all the time. We don't need any electricity. I think the thing about drugs, all drugs, is they're not necessarily good for you. Some of them are mind expanding. Some of them aren't.
Incredibly addictive.
And making them illegal doesn't solve any problems at all.
Very, very addictive, aren't they?
Some are. Alcohol, for example, cigarettes, both of which are legal, very addictive.
Yeah, and
Should they be banned?
I think the other thing is that the police don't really seem to make any efforts in really keeping these drugs off the streets. It's part of the police are getting paid off by the dealers often.
Tony, I think,
and the policy is not to. Anyway, I mean
they can't do it. An illegal market with super profits is unstoppable. You take one person out. It's happening
crystal
in Mexico
meth,
now.
the police take a very serious attitude to. If crystal meth is circulating here in Bristol, as I understand it, you will find the police are absolutely on it straight away.
They're hoping to stop it taking a hold here. But of course, in the United States, it already has taken a hold and
Well, that's not Britain, is it? In
No,
the United States.
no,
It might
but-
become like that here.
Oh, yes, it
it's
will.
just a question of finding the right copper to pay off, isn't it?
Well, it can be, because the super profits are massive. The 'Ndrangheta in the Camorra in Italy are absolutely embedded in the state.
So why do we bother having a police if people can just do these crimes
Well,
and
I
no
think
one really cares?
maybe we should have anarchism, Tony. No police and
No
everybody
police.
do the drugs they want. Oh, well, there you are.
It's not about drugs, it's about murder too, yeah?
Yes, okay. Yes,
So no law.
No, well,
You're going to quite an extreme point now.
No, I'm just trying to reduce your argument to absurdity. The reason
not
why they
absurd.
cannot stop the drink.
It's not absurd to make sure that there is no access for children to LSD like sweets in a sweet shop.
Nobody's suggesting there should be, Tony, but we still need to legalise drugs or decriminalise them in the first place, because otherwise, places like Mexico and in Colombia, the left-wing governments are moving towards decriminalisation and also legalisation, because people are dying every day, being killed every day about the money, and you can get rid of that by regularising the market. If you don't do that, the banking system, of course, is totally dependent on dirty drug money. Maybe we don't need banks. We should just get rid of banks and go back to barter.
Well, I think